Hello, friends. Welcome to the very first episode of Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous. I'm your host, Julia Washington. It's no secret to anybody who knows me that I am mixed. My dad is Black, my mom is Italian. Growing up in a predominantly white community in California, it wasn't always easy seeing myself and fitting in. Because I watched television so much, my parents instituted this system where you had to earn what they called TV tickets. Every TV ticket was worth 30 minutes of television, and there were different things around the house that you could do to earn a TV ticket. Not only did I not successfully earn TV tickets, I also secretly watched television whenever I could. So clearly there was a problem from the beginning that I loved TV. One of the things about television that sort of became my first introduction to pop culture was the lack of representation. But when you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, you don't really realize that. You don't really think, oh, nobody on TV looks like me. For me, it was a matter of enjoying the shows. I grew up watching The Cosby Show, Family Ties, 227, A Different World, Family Matters, TGIF Friday night on ABC. In addition to that, we also had Family Film Night. The family member of the month got to pick whatever that Family Film Night movie would be. So we grew up surrounded by television shows and movies. There was music throughout the house as well. You knew dad was home when Soul Train was on, some sort of music video, Doctor Who, Star Trek, any sort of old movie, black and white monster movie, like that's how you knew dad was home. And my mom was a reader, so we read a lot and a lot of books, and she worked really hard to find books that had characters that looked like us. But in the late 80s and early 90s, and even into the late 90s, it really was hard. So I found myself being a little jealous of these fictional worlds that were being created. They looked like they were having fun. They had a solid friend group. Everything was wrapped up in 30 minutes or an hour and a half, depending on what it was. There was always some sort of message about it that we could sit around and talk about as a family. And then as I got older and started dissecting a little bit more and a little bit deeper, I realized I could never play Diana Ross in a movie. I could never play Julia Roberts' daughter. Like, these were things that I started thinking about in junior high. And I started feeling jealous of actors and actresses who were able to play these characters. So starting to realize that as I started embarking on my own interests and ideals, which included theater, writing, music, painting, I started to notice there's a whole place in this pop culture world where I don't fit. And now here I am in my mid to late 30s, which is a hard thing to admit to whomever is listening at this point. And we are now starting to see better representation. Sure, I'm still jealous. So it's just turned into this lifelong examination of what pop culture is. How does it make me feel? And who can relate and identify with what we are seeing? What is it like to watch a TV show and not think this isn't representative of anything I understand? Or that person doesn't really look like me, so I'm going to check out. Or that person looks like me. That's kind of cool. Like, okay, go on, girlfriend. That's why I'm jealous of pop culture, because I watch it and I can't always see myself in it. And I'm so jealous of the people that can. But the world is changing. Representation is starting to become more on the forefront of this entertainment industry. And I am so excited to see where it's going. I am so thrilled that you are willing to join this journey of examining pop culture through the mixed lens. My entire life has been examining the world through a mixed lens. So that is why we are here, to examine pop culture through the mixed lens, because there are so many layers and so many experiences within the mixed community that can feel very isolating and very lonely. But then at the same time, there are things that are universal. So I'm really excited that you're joining us. I hope that you sit and subscribe and download and follow us on Instagram and just join in the conversation that we are having, especially if you are also a mixed person. I want to hear from you too. I want to hear your experiences. Is there a TV show or a movie that really touched you deeply or really bothered you? Let's have a conversation about it. I look forward to embarking on this journey with you. I have never shied away from talking about my mixed experience. I've never shied away from talking about pop culture. In my younger years, I dreamed of having a career in Hollywood, whether it was a screenwriter, television writer, being in front of the screen. It didn't matter to me. I wanted to create visual arts in some way. We are going to talk about how these movies and shows, music impacts us in ways that maybe is a unique experience because we're mixed, or maybe it's universal. That's what we're going to find out. So, without further ado, here we go to the show.
So my family makeup is, my mom, my dad. My dad is the one who is Black. My mother is Italian. And then I have two siblings. I have a brother and a sister. They are significantly older than me in age. And we
I didn't know you were Italian.
Yeah, my mom's hella Italian. But not
Why
like
am
the
I just
Italian
finding
that
this
everyone
out, Julia?
I don't know. But she's not the kind of Italian that we all assume, like the Godfather Italian, or the Goodfellas Italian. Like, it's a totally different type of Italian culture, which also isn't heavily represented in pop culture either, right? So that's really crazy to actually, now that I'm realizing that neither side of my family has ever been represented in the way that I know them in pop culture.
Same.
And so I'm the baby of the family, which is a unique experience in the sense that I'm the baby, but I also grew up kind of like only child because my siblings were out of the house by the time I was like 12.
I resonate with this a lot, and you know that.
Yeah.
It's funny because we have such like a similar experience with it being so different. Except my mom's the one who's Mexican and white, but my dad's just, good old white dude. Like, I don't know. I think we're like Norwegian and there's Irish in there for sure because my cousin celebrates St. Patrick's Day like it's his religious holiday. But then I have two older brothers who also, like you, like were out of the house when I was in middle school or like going into high school. So I didn't really grow up with them fully in the sense of like my adolescent years. And they have a different dad, so they're Mexican and Italian. So I have that aspect too. I would say Godfather Italian. In 5th grade, I remember very distinctly one time Joe came to pick me up. I was 10, so he was, almost 20. And he had already had like a couple tattoos by this point. I think he had cornrows, if I'm not mistaken. He worked in construction at the time, so those cornrows were nasty and he always made me take them out. But he's like 6'4", and he's like he just looks like an angry Italian man, honestly. And he comes to pick me up, and I'm just like this 10-year-old kid, happy as can be that my brother's coming to get me. And everyone the next day was like, "Your brother's so scary." And I'm like, why?
Because he's normal to you.
Why?
He's normal to you. Yeah.
Because he's normal to me. Because to me, that's my big brother. But to everyone else, it's like, who is this Italian mobster coming to pick you up?
Right. Should we be worried? Do we need to call your parents?
Man, this is not, these are neither of your parents. And what is happening?
Oh my gosh, pin in it. But I have actually a really good story of when my child was in primary school and my mom and my brother went to go pick him up. So we'll talk about that. If not today,
Tell me
another.
Why? Tell me now. Go for it. I'm excited.
So my brother's the darkest one out of all of us. He was, he's the firstborn, and he got the green eyes, so we kind of hated him for that. And he's got a lot of like goldish yellow in his hair, and I did too as a child.
Ooh,
but
cool.
his maintained more than mine did. Like mine, you really have to look at it, and you really can tell in the summer that there's gold in there, but in the winter you can't really tell. Anyway, and my mom is she is like the color of paper, and she had dark hair for the longest time. And so my child is like me, ethnically ambiguous. I forget why my mom and brother had to pick him up from school. I forget why they did that. But anyway, so, you know, it's the after school program that's on the school campus. They call his grade room and it's like, hey, send this child. Well, then this adorable mixed kid comes into the room, but he's not my child. And my mom, and he's looking like, you said my parents are here, and like my mom and my brother are looking and are like, this isn't our child. Like, where's our child? Like, all these other children are coming, but none of them are ours. And then eventually, like, I forget which, if it was my mom or my brother, but eventually someone says, hey, we're still waiting for this child. And they're like, oh, this isn't your child? And my brother was like, no. So there was this assumption that because there weren't a lot of brown kids at my kid's school either. So there
Yeah.
was this assumption that this brown child belonged to my brown brother as a nephew.
My grandma came to pick me up from elementary school when I fell off the stage at band practice one year, because whatever.
It's clumsy.
They sent her home with a sheet about concussions, but they sent it home to her in Spanish. She doesn't fucking speak Spanish. And they
like
did it
making
based
an
solely off of
assumption.
the way she looks. Literally
Yeah.
based solely off the way she looks. Mind you, she had to go in and say, like, I'm here for Christina Johnson. So I don't know what it is that made them think that she doesn't speak English. She doesn't have an accent.
You know what it is? I think it's when people, like, there's a fear about asking, right? Because remember, we just had that
Yes.
moment of like, don't ask me what I am. It's so offensive. But then on the other side of that coin, it's like, at the same time, we're also setting you up. We're setting you up for failure because we didn't create space for you to be like, I'm not clear on how I need to support you. When did you realize that your family was different from other families?
I think I realized it really young because a lot of the friends I made had stay-at-home moms.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was a working mom. And I say that lovingly, of course, but I mean, like,
Yeah.
she was a working mom from the second that she could go back to work. So I was raised from like 0 to the time I started school with a nanny. Her name was Grace, and she was full Mexican. She spoke Spanish, and she taught me Spanish and English at the same time. So I actually grew up, like, my first couple years of life like a Mexican child, really. Like, and I went home on the weekends, and that's where I learned all my whiteness, because my mom would always tell Grace, like, Grace, I get we're Mexican, but I don't speak Spanish, and I need to communicate with my child.
For me, I don't know if I ever realized in childhood that we were different. We went to a predominantly white school, so you would think that it would be obvious that we were like the darkest children on campus. And it was a private religious school for that matter. And then,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And then we could have a whole conversation about that shit. And we lived in a predominantly white community. I didn't think anything was weird about my family until like we would leave sort of the bubbles that we lived in. You know, like school was a bubble and people understood that. They had racial prejudice, but I didn't know to identify it at the time, because when you're 8, you know, you don't know what's happening. You just know something's happening.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it was, honestly, I think I was probably in high school when I realized like, oh, there's not a whole lot of like, I don't have a lot of friends who have a dad or a parent that looks like my parent. There was another family though at the elementary school that was also, and this maybe is what normalized it, I'm willing to bet, as I'm thinking about it. The mom was Black, the dad was white. They also had 3 children. The oldest boy was maybe my age or a year younger. So seeing that starting in like first grade, I was like, I guess, an early version of normalizing a mixed family, because we weren't the only mixed family. Yeah. We were one of 2 mixed families. High school, I really did have a hard time. High school was like some serious racial identity issues that were hard to deal with. I think racial identity is just hard to deal with in general, but then you add adolescent hormone changes and you're just like, what's happening?
I think too, it's different. I always knew our family was different because from the start, my brothers had a different family than I did. You know, if you think about it, I grew up in a family where it was normal that our family was not 100% one thing. you know,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
very normal for me to know that my brothers have another dad or another set of like family members that not necessarily aren't my family, but they're not. Like,
Yeah. I have a
no, go for it.
question.
Yeah.
Did you guys do the whole with you, because you're the product of your parents, but your brothers have a separate dad? Did you guys do the whole sibling family members of your brothers? Were you encouraged to refer to them as like grandma, grandpa, uncle, auntie?
So I will say that my brother's dad's family has always been
Mm-hmm.
like really inclusive, and like they ask about me and they check on me and they check in with me. And like as an adult, I have them on like Facebook friends and stuff. But
Yeah.
my brothers, like, I don't know, like they just, it wasn't like an encouraged thing either way. It was more just like a bonus. Like if they asked or whatever, like we were cordial and nice and like, but I would say that that kind of gave me an upper, like from the beginning, realizing that not every family is just this black and white thing. Like from the start, I
Mm-hmm.
understood that families were gray area, and my family
Mm-hmm.
is gray area because we had all these mixed parts already, and it didn't
Yeah.
make sense. And then we all look so different. Like my brothers look so different from each other. One's 6'4" and one's 5'7". Like,
Holy. If you really look at my siblings and you can see it. You can see that we're related. We have similar bone
yeah,
structure.
the
And
same.
that's the big
You
thing, is
can
the bone
definitely see
structure.
that. Yeah.
And then, but if you were to meet us separately, which a lot of people in town have, because again, the age gap, you may not necessarily put it together. Like I have
No.
a newer friend that I posted a picture on Easter or Siblings Day on Instagram, and she DM'd me. She's like, I had no idea that that person was your brother. And I'm like, that's crazy to me, because like, he's like 100% my brother, but we look so different when in the context of like when you're trying to categorize people. But when you really start to look at our features, our mannerisms, the way that we talk, it's just like, yeah, we're all the same person.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. Whenever I'm around my brothers, I get that too. I'm like, oh, I can see like our eye shape. I can see like our mouth. I can
Hmm.
see the bone structure, how we all get like certain things from my mom or my mom's side of the family. It's just wild how genetics work. And but yeah, I think that that definitely helped like play a part in me understanding mixed experiences from a super young age and different
Hmm.
types. Like, I mean, we're both different ethnicities, and then we're also different, family setups. And then they have the
Hmm.
setup of having, split parents and a new parent, and I have the setup of only having my parents my whole life. So it's like
Yeah.
I've had to be very understanding from my whole life of different situations, and I think that's what's helped me.
Yeah.
But it also is what makes me feel so like, it makes me feel like my experience isn't like, I don't want to say valid, but it's hard to call myself mixed because I am so white.
I feel like there's a lot of imposter syndrome too when you do sort of come out shaded lighter, right? Like I'm the lightest one in my siblings, and I can say this without hesitation because we've had these conversations. I probably struggled the most with my racial identity out of all my siblings. Like when you see my brother, he looks monoracial for the most part. Like I've always struggled. People at home can't see this because we're on audio, but like my hair is big and curly and soft and flowy, and my sister definitely got black girl hair, or what we call 4C curls. And my brother and I have similar hair, but on him, because he's male and he keeps it short, it doesn't look ethnic one way or the other. It's crazy when you think about like you said, the genetics dice. Like you never know what's going to come out. Like when, oh my God, I know you haven't watched the Harry and Meghan interview, and I'm not digressing on purpose, but I will tie it back, I promise. When Meghan Markle said that there were conversations with Prince Harry about how dark Archie's skin was going to be when he was born, and Oprah was shocked. Like, yes, Oprah, I get that you're shocked, but also like nobody who comes from a mixed background was shocked by that statement.
Yeah, no.
because because I one of the things I learned in the aftermath of that interview is that it's pretty universal that we all have this experience, or the majority of us have this experience, where we have a family member of some kind who doesn't understand why we came out looking the way we look. And then they make comments, and you're just like, that's
Yeah.
cute. And by cute, I
It's
mean really, really irritating and damaging.
and we're still asking, what are you?
I know. Oh my God. What are you?
I'm a
So I
human.
used to tell people, yeah, people be like, "Oh, what nationality are you?" Which I think was a thing very popular in the 90s and early 2000s. And I haven't heard that lately because we've evolved as a culture. But I would say things like, well, because of the 14th Amendment, I'm an American. No, 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 no. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. Like, what are you? What are your parents?
What are your parents? You
Mom and
mean
dad?
Bob and
My
Kathy?
parents are mom and dad. And then to put the responsibility on somebody who's 12 years old to try and answer that question, if you think about it, it's kind of fucked up. Because it's like at 12, you're still figuring out your own identity. I mean, you're figuring out your identity until the day you die for some people. But at 12, you're figuring out your identity. You're in junior high. So that's real stressful because junior high is stressful. And there's just all these things. And then to have people you don't know say things like that to you. Now, as an adult, I can be like, that shit's not going to affect me. I don't know you, so I'm not going to let that ruin my day. But between the ages of like 12 and 29, it was like, stop invalidating my existence. Just stop and stop putting the responsibility on me to explain my existence to you. Like, I'm just going to be real adorable, so you can't hate me.
And that's part of the mixed charm.
It's part of it's part of survival. It's part of survival. If you think about it, like, I always wonder, would I be so like big personality if I wasn't trying to deflect from the fact that I don't want people to ask me what my racial makeup is?
No.
Like, I'm gonna give this big shiny show when we're engaging with each other, so that way we can avoid you asking me questions like, what are you? Which segues us into, I went to a predominantly white high school. I think I had one other friend at my high school that was like, oh no, I had a couple. There was a couple friends that I had that were Black, but there was also only like 15 Black kids in my school. 15 and a half if you counted me. Do people ever do that shit to you? People did that shit to me all the time. Oh, we have like 3.5 Black people in this room. And I'm like, cool. So I'm assuming I'm the half. So thanks. I don't know how to take
I'm
that.
sorry. That reminds me though of a conversation I had with my cousin Trina. I remember being like, I don't know, I was like 7 or 8, and I remember telling her, like, I had just found out that my brothers were my half brothers. Like, I didn't understand it until then. And I was like trying to explain it to her. I was like, so like they said that like they're just my half brothers, but like I don't know what half of me. And she's like, is it like your top half? Is it your bottom half? Is it like your left half or your right half? Because she was like 15 and just trying to make me feel better because she's 15 and doesn't know what to say. And I'm like, I don't know, but I feel like they're my whole brothers. And she's like, they're definitely your whole brothers, even if they're only half of your genetics. And I'm like, yeah. And it's funny because it's like my cousin is basically my sister at this point in my life. And it's like, it's the same kind of advice we still give each other. But like, even at like such a young age, we're both trying to rationalize, what does that mean? I don't know, but they're still your whole brothers. Ignore what they're saying.
Right? Oh my gosh. I love that story. What was your high school experience like? Because we are in an area that does have a large Hispanic Latinx population. So our county,
actually,
depending on which census you read, our county is either 2% or 8% Black, which the Hispanic Latinx population varies between 45 and 49%.
I would say that part of it, that of my experience, made it super inclusive. It's inclusive in the sense of like, if you're Mexican in this area, I grew up in a town where like they spoke Spanish more than English. In high school, it was very much like that. I'm saying that all to get back to the fact that like my high school and all the high schools around here are very like Hispanic because we live in a Hispanic community, but we live in a Hispanic community because we live in an agriculture community. And that's what I'm trying to point out. Like, that's a huge part of the Mexican American narrative, is the fact that you're field workers or your farm workers. But I will say it's a lot more inclusive in the fact that I would say a lot of the people who live here, like white people, just are so used to the Mexican population that they're a lot more accepting of it than they are in other states or other areas. I am very white 50% of the year. So like you get that imposter syndrome where it's like in the summertime I look too Mexican, where the Mexicans are like, they just talk to me in Spanish and I'm like, I don't know, I'm out of place. And then in the winter time, it's like they act like I'm the whitest person of all time.
That actually is a really good segue into representation in pop culture, because as a mixed Black American woman, when I watch television and movies that have representation of other cultures in it, up until 5 years ago, I'm not assuming there's anything wrong with it per se, right? Well, I'll say longer than that. I'll say more than 5 years ago, but we really started talking about these things within the last 5 years. Like Jane the Virgin's a really good example. Like I don't know that what they're showing me on TV about the Latinx experience is true or untrue, because I don't have that experience. So I'm seeing that representation through pop culture. I may or may not know that it could be harmful or helpful. Those types of things. Same when it comes to like Asian American Pacific Islander representation. I don't necessarily immediately know what's harmful or helpful because that's not the culture I reside in. I can speak sometimes to the Black experience from my experience, not like the Black experience, but my Black experience. So like
absolutely.
when there's like movies that have like Hispanic or Latinx themes, I don't know if it's bad or good.
Everybody's experience is individual. So my Mexican American experience is going to be different than someone else's because mine is also coming from a mixed mom, and so I'm still getting the trickle down effect.
Recently, Mixed-ish, which is a spinoff of Blackish, did an episode. Firstly, Blackish does a really good episode about colorism that everybody should watch because it's such an important conversation. The spinoff show Mixed-ish recently had an episode in their second season where the parents don't realize that the world doesn't see their children the way that they see their children. And so Santa Monica is the youngest daughter, and I'm like, that's like, I feel like I'm the Santa Monica of the family, which segues us into dating.
Yay!
Because there have been guys I've dated where I'm just like, oh, like 6 months, 3 months into it, or 2 dates into it, or whatever have you, and I'm like, oh, you're racially prejudiced in like the worst kind of way. Like, you're not racist per se, but you're racially prejudiced in that you have very harmful views about all of the races that exist, specifically Black people, and I can't take you home because my daddy is a big Black man, and that's going to be a problem for you.
I don't know. I don't feel like it's affected my dating life a whole lot. For me hasn't been affected just because I look white as shit most of the time.
Well, but also too, like we talked about, we live in a community that does have a larger Hispanic Latinx population.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more normal.
I just look very normal to everyone here. I'm like, oh, you're one of the mixed people here? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
I'm regular here.
Yeah. Whereas I'm like, yes, I don't know how to tell you that my dad is Black. I don't know how many more times I have to say that for you to stop saying that weird ass shit to me. And no, I can't take you home.
Oh my God. Could you need to make a book that just is like, I don't know how else to tell you my dad is Black. Like, he's going to be Black on the stack. He's going to be Black in the back. I don't know. Like, he's always
like, what else do you want me to say? What else do you want me to say? This isn't changing. My genetic makeup isn't changing. Like, back to the Megan Archie conversation. It doesn't change. Back to the Megan Archie conversation. Like, we don't know what color our children are going to come out, so don't make it a big deal.
Yeah, I can't predict the future. I don't know.
Like, I don't know what's going to happen. And then we did a
show up.
Yeah, and then we do a DNA test, and there's like way more European on my dad's DNA than we expected. Like, oh, no wonder I came out so light. Dad's got way more European than we expected. You can't see. The audience can't see, but Christina's cracking up right now at that statement.
Sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. I have to keep muting it to get rid of the static because I realized if I mute my mic, then you come in more clear, but then I try to
Gotcha.
unmute it so you can hear my reactions, but I'm also
Yeah.
silent laughing right now, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So, okay, it didn't affect my dating life so much. How has it affected yours? Because I feel like it's affected yours a lot.
So I grew up in the generation where like color blindness was really promoted, which in fast forward 25 years and we realized that's actually really harmful. But 25 years ago we didn't know that it was, or even 30 years ago we didn't know it was harmful. It was just a way to like, I think that generation for their children was trying to level the playing field in terms of like you can be that person's friend even though they're darker than you or lighter than you. But now we know that shit's harmful. And so I've had a handful of guys
That
that I've dated.
explanation, I'm sorry, that explanation is so funny. You're allowed to be their friend, even if they're darker or lighter than you. Like, imagine like actually saying that to your child. Can I help you?
I feel like that's the thing people actually have said to children, because they don't know how to have conversations about race. When you're not facing racial issues every day, you really don't know how to talk about it. Anyway, so I've had some people where it's like not an issue, like, oh, and then I'll be like really passionate about an issue that deeply affects the Black community, and then it turns into a thing for them. Like, why do you care? You don't have to face that issue. You're not that dark, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh, hold up. We've been hanging out for 6 months and you're just now fucking bringing this up. Like, you just now think that it's appropriate to say that to me. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm light. It doesn't matter
Also,
if you don't think that I look.
what a terrible thing just as a person to be like, well, if it doesn't affect you, why give a shit? Like, I don't know. There's a
Right?
lot of things that don't affect me that I give a shit about.
Yeah, just because I'm not going to face the same racial prejudice that my cousin's going to face doesn't mean that I'm not allowed to care or work towards better equality and equity for my people, just because I don't necessarily look like my people. Once those conversations come up, I'll be like, and we're done dating, which is super disappointing because you like totally paid all the time. or like, I don't know. Obviously, if I had found my person, I would be married at this point. But we do in our household still have very lively conversations about
Wait, that's not so obvious. You could just be with them for a really long time because you're very independent, and I know you. And if you just didn't want to get married, you'd just hold off for like 27 years, and then you would do it as like a grand thing at 65, just because you wanted to feel fancy one afternoon. Don't tell me like with fact and dedication, you'd be married right now if you found your person, Julia. Because no, the fuck you would not. You would be like, no, I have things I want to do first.
That's a fair point. And also, like, I don't want to be like, that's a huge legal commitment. And I've had so many friends get divorced and watch them and see how much money that costs. And I'm like, we all know that if this relationship ends, I'm not making any efforts because that's a shit ton of work to get divorced. So when this happens, it's going to be for fucking ever, because we all know I'm not making any efforts to find a lawyer. I can't even fucking call the cable company to get my bill reduced, right? Like,
she said, look, I'm too cheap and too, like, just, I don't give enough shit to divorce you. You just stuck with me now.
No, here's what it is. I don't have the bandwidth to do all the steps that is required in getting a divorce.
It seems like a lot of work.
And really expensive. And I ain't got that kind of money.
I mean, it just seems like a lot of steps. He might be. You never know.
He might be.
I like that you're planning your divorce before you plan your wedding, though.
Well, that's how I'm gonna know.
You ran through your wedding so fast in this conversation that you went straight to the divorce and how much you don't want to go through it. And I'm like, you don't have anyone yet to marry, let alone divorce. And you're like, look, I don't have the time to divorce you today.
All that to say, that's how you know it's going to be serious when I'm like, yes, I'm getting married, because you know that I don't have the bandwidth or energy to get a divorce. That's how you're going to know, Christina. When I come to you and be like, oh, I'm engaged to insert whatever celebrity crush here I have. Shall we name them right now? Chris Evans, Sam Heughan, Anthony Mackie. So any of those, like, if I say I'm getting married to any of those guys, you're going to be like, holy shit, this is real.
Like I
because she's not going to
into my mom, because I don't know. You named off
who any of those people are. That's
who
all
the fuck are these people?
Chris Evans is Captain America. Sam Heughan is on Outlander, and Anthony Mackie is also in the Marvel universe. He is the Falcon. All that to say, like, in our household, very lively conversations have always existed. We've always talked about race. We've always talked about social justice. We've always talked about equity issues. We've always talked about women's issues. And if you can't handle that, you can't handle that. Like my former brother-in-law, one time we were having a conversation a couple years ago, and he was just like, he just in a separate room, but he could hear us, my sister and I talking, and he just did this big sigh and was like, you guys are always talking about women's issues and gender issues. Sometimes it's not about gender issues. And I was like, spoken like somebody who's never been treated poorly because they're a woman.
Spoken like someone who doesn't have a vagina.
And I think that's part of the problem too, right? Like if you don't recognize and have empathy for the fact that there's going to be struggles in my life that maybe that exist for me that don't exist for you, and you're not going to be able to support me through it, and vice versa. Like I don't want to be with somebody whose struggles and issues I don't get.
Well,
I see that a lot in the artist community.
That's the key word though that you said, like it's just about empathy. It's like, can you be empathetic to or sympathetic to someone else's situation, even though you've never experienced it? And you have to, I feel like at some points in your life, you have to just choose to be empathetic, even though you don't understand, because maybe later on in life you will understand.
Yeah.
But just to be a person who just shuts down and be like, nah, I don't want to fucking deal with that. Like, that's just shitty.
And I see that kind of lack of support in the artist community. There are a lot of people who are dating artists who think it's going to be, I don't know, glamorous. You know, they're dating a guitarist or they're dating whatever. And then it turns out creative minds are kind of like, that's it. Good luck surviving us, because we've got a million things happening. We're scattered brains. Focus.
I don't think anyone actually wants to live with a creative mind. We can ask Taylor, sitting right here, but I don't think it's like the most like stressless environment.
And it takes a lot of understanding, because if you're really passionate about making, if you're really passionate about making your art happen, there's a lot of sacrifice. And so if you're like 40 and still a musician playing in bars and not making, quote, made it yet, like there's still a chance that you can make it, but then your spouse is now telling you need to get a real fucking job. That's not a winning endorsement for that relationship. That would make me feel like you don't believe in my art, so why are we together?
On the other side of things though, like some people get into relationships with like idiots and they don't go up front and be like, look, we need 2 incomes to support ourselves. You can't go and like just pursue all of your dreams and then we need to be your support system.
That's a big conversation that needs to happen, right? Like if I was born to be a workhorse 9 to 5 and had the dreams of being a creative content officer of some big company, that also takes a lot of sacrifice. It just has quicker rewards and more obvious rewards than being a musician or a painter or a writer. But you wouldn't, in turn, if I was that person who was trying to be a CCO, you wouldn't turn around as my partner and be like, this isn't happening fast enough and I really need you to fucking focus. Like I need you to get a real job that's going to pay you and give you health insurance right now.
I think it's just lack of giving a shit, really.
Honestly, I could spend the rest of my life dissecting and talking about being mixed and break all things down in relationship to pop culture, media, art, entertainment, all of it, because there's no, like, my entire life there's been very little representation, so I'm always like leaning towards that lens. And then also being mixed, that's just the experience I'm coming from, so everything has that sort of lens on it for me.
Yeah, which has got to be super cool. And I'm curious to know, like, I guess as we go on in this podcast, like what you would have wished for when you were a teenager, like, and how you would have responded to those kinds of shows if you got them at that time versus getting them now as an adult. That's something we're going to need to explore.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I'll have to think about that more. Anyway, we look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great week. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in, y'all. This was our first episode, very vulnerable stuff, lots of things that we talked about that I'm sure will continue to come up throughout the show. Tune in next week when we discuss the Netflix original, Ginny and Georgia. See you then.